Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to walk you through some potential important interview questions that are related to the web API in the .NET Core. Along with that, I will give you a short answer and I will give you every single thing that you need to prepare for it. And I'm going to show you a live example of what it is and how you should understand these questions and answer it to crack the interview. So come, let's dive deeper into it. So one of the questions that was asked is, what is a web API in .NET Core and how it is different from a traditional web application? So the short answer for this, a web API is a service that provides data and functionality over HTTP for use by other applications. So it differs from a traditional web app by focusing on data exchange rather than rendering web pages. So let's understand what is this. So imagine this is a website. Now this website can be developed in two ways. One that you're watching here is developed by the Angular application. Basically, Angular is doing all this UI thing. But in order for Angular to work with the data, like in order for Angular to show all these things nicely, like what we are doing here, you see this, all these data. Now, Web API is something that it deals with exchanging of data. So if you click on it, this is the Web API. It exchanges only the data. It doesn't exchange any HTML. So the traditional web application could be developed with ASPX, MVC, and all those things, right? So they render the HTML itself. So that's the difference between web API and a traditional web application. So that is what it is. And I'll give you the short description for every single thing that I explain you. So don't worry, just try to understand what it is so that it will be easy for you to capture and answer even in your own words. Okay, so now we know what is web API in .NET Core and how it is different from the traditional web application. The next question is, how do you create a web API in .NET Core? So the short answer will be, you can create a web API in .NET Core by creating a new project and then defining the routes, controllers, action, and returning the data in response to the HTTP request. So let's understand what it is. So basically, we created a new project in .NET Core. We created the routes, which is on the programs. The routes is nothing but we are mapping the routes. So using routing, using map controller, and then go to the controller and define the routes. So you can define the routes like this. See, it's an HTTP. It's coming from the name of the method is get reservation, and it is coming from a controller called reservation controller, right? After that, once this endpoint is hit, we process the data. Like here, let's take this example. We process the data and send it with the response HTTP status code. Okay, will come for a 200 HTTP status codes. We will talk about it, but that is what it is. The next question is, what are the common HTTP methods? They are also called as HTTP verbs. So if someone is asking you what is HTTP verbs or define HTTP methods, or tell me about various HTTP method, then this is what you need to answer. Okay, so the common HTTP method includes get, which is retrieving data, post, which is creating a data, update is nothing but the put, and delete, removing the data. And there are more HTTP verbs, but these are the very common thing that we use. And there's something called patch. Patch is to update a particular property of an entity. Okay, so for example, if someone is updating the name of the user, just the first name, then that's called patch. It's by patching only a part of a complete resource. Okay, so you would have seen this. We have these get endpoint and all those things in the controller, right? So that's what it is. Now what the next question is, how does the model binding works in web API and why is model validation important? So first of all, what is model binding? What is model? Let's take an example of this. So let's see first the short answer, then I'll explain you. Short answer is, model binding maps incoming request data to action method parameters. Model validation is crucial to ensure data integrity and security. That's the short answer you can give. Now let's understand. This is an endpoint and we have something called model. So if you go to reservation model, this has these properties. So someone is going to send a model of these properties. Okay, so this is what called model binding. So when a request comes with these property in the request body, if the property matches, automatically it will map all these things. And when you put a head point breakpoint here, you'll be able to hover on this model, which is here. Okay, and then you'll be able to see everything. So this is the return model, this is the incoming model. So any request that is fired, the model which is in this parenthesis, right, will be hit. So someone is going to send all these things and we are going to validate that. So validation, right? So why validation is important? Now we should be able to validate any of these properties, because if the capacity is only 2, they cannot send 6. The table name or something, they cannot send different thing. They cannot send a different branch ID. So that's crucial for us to validate these incoming data before we process it. Okay, so that's what it is. Now, there's another question that is frequently asked: what is content negotiation in Web API and why it is significant? So the short answer is content negotiation allows client to request data in different formats. For example, it could be a JSON, XML, and it's essential for supporting various client preferences. So I will explain you what it is. See, this is a client which is calling this endpoint. This client, if you go to request, okay, is very important. You should understand this. This is called content type. You see this content type? I'll expand this. Here you go. When this Angular is requesting, calling this endpoint, it is saying my content type is application/JSON. So it is telling the web server that, hey, when you process it, send me the data in the JSON format. That's why automatically content negotiation happened in the web API and it's sent with the JSON format. If an application which is requesting for application/XML, the content will come in XML, and this happens automatically, and that's why it is called content negotiation. Okay, what methods you can use to secure a .NET Core Web API? See, you can use techniques like token based authentication, API keys, OAuth, or other authentication and authorization mechanism. So we have seen ADB2C, there's something called ADB2B, there's something called identity server. All those things are example. Basically they're all deals with the token based authentication. Okay, so this is what the answer is. So the next question is very important question. Explain CORS, CORS, and how to enable it in .NET Core Web API. First, let's understand. So I'm going to tell you the first answer. CROSS, that stands for Cross Origin Resource Sharing. This controls the access to the web API from different domains, and you can enable it by configuring the CROSS middleware in your API. This is the short answer, and I'll explain you what it is. You see this? This website is coming from localhost 4200. This is a URL and that's called a domain. It's called local domain. Okay. Now this domain is asking something to the API, to this one. So the API is running in this port. This is a different one. This is unique, right? Now this one is asking content from this endpoint, which means they both are different. They don't serve everything from the same location. Now they are literally kind of unknown people, right? So now what this API will tell us generally, hey, I don't know who you are. You are sitting somewhere else. I cannot give you anything that you ask for me. And that's how the cross-origin resource sharing error will come. And how do you fix it? If you come to .NET Core and go to this program.cs, and if you're using the older version, that's called startup.cs. So what we are doing is, we are saying, hey, we are adding a cross policy. The policy name is default, and what this policy is doing is, please allow requests from any origin, allow from any method, allow from any header. This is ideally not correct, meaning because this is all sample demo application, I'm allowing it. But generally speaking, let's say a client is having two applications, okay, application A and B. B is web API. Now B will tell allow anything that comes from A. That's it. So they will specify here which allow origin is required. And similarly, if they are allowing only get, they will specify only get. Okay, so that's how they configure. But this is not enough. This is the service configuration. Now this one needs to be hooked up in the middleware. How do you do that? Come here and there's something called app.useCross and provide the policy name. Let me comment this and rerun this. I will show you what happens. If I don't have this policy in place, when it requests for data, So let's request for data. See, right now it's pending, and let's see what happens. See, this is what called cross origin resource sharing, missing allow original request. So this is what it is. So you right now we have not configured to allow this one. So the web API actually responded with error that, hey, I don't know who you are, I cannot give you whatever you ask. That's how you got this error, and this is very common. Okay, so the next question is, what is request and response serialization and deserialization in a web API? So the short answer is, serialization converts objects into a format suitable for transmission. For example, it's a JSON. While deserialization is another way around. So the deserialization transforms a data back into object for processing. So for example, let's take an example of the get. So here we are processing, we got a bunch of this IEnumerable of restaurant branch model. Now when you send this model into OK object, it will serialize this into JSON, and that's what you see it in the place of the response. This is serialized content. Now let's say you are going to click on this and submit a data. Okay, let's say you're submitting a data. Now the data is going from the payload. So if you see this was the serialized content. You can see this is a serialized content which was sent, but it would received in. So the serialized content has been received in the reservation. So the here, if you look at this, there's a post. Okay, so that was received here. So when the serialized content was received, it was deserialized into this model automatically, and that's using the auto binding, the model binding. So that is what serialization and deserialization means. Okay, so converting model into JSON is called serialization. Converting the JSON back to the model object is called deserialization. The next question is, how do you handle exceptions in .NET Core Web API, and what are the best practice for error handling? The answer is, you should use try-catch block in your action to handle exception, returning the appropriate HTTP status code, and informative error responses. Okay, that's very important. Now you should also log errors for the debugging purpose. Now you cannot add try catch everywhere, so we can handle this exception globally. How do you handle exceptions globally? You come to program and go to the middleware. There is something called use exception handler. You can handle the exceptions the way it is handled here, which means every single error that happens will come here, and we will eventually put a 500 server error, because any exception is something called you cannot process. Server cannot process at all if there is something seriously wrong with the server side. That's how the client will be notified that please do not try this request again. We have got into a big issue from our side, which we will check and fix it. Okay, that's what it is called. Another important thing is what tools you can use to document a web API for better user friendliness. So answer is, tools like Swagger or OpenAPI can help automate the documentation process, making it easier for developers to understand and use your API. What does it mean? See, let's consider this. Let's understand what it is, right? So we have two controllers, but in general speaking, company will have many controllers, many methods in each controller. Now, how do we explain these things? How do we explain to the consumers that, hey, I have these endpoints, send this, you will get this, all those things? We cannot, write it in our own thing, right? So for that only, there's something called Swagger or OpenAPI. So let me minimize this. I'll show you what it does mean. So we have something called Swagger that we can install the package. So you install the Swagger package and you say builder.service add Swagger generation. Okay, in the older version of .NET Core, ideally you will see just a configure service, services dot add Swagger generation. Once you add the service, you have to hook up that in the middleware. In the middleware, we are saying use the Swagger and use the Swagger UI. So what it will do is, this package will read all the controllers, and not only that, it will go to controllers, it will go to the top here, it will read this one, it will read this, it will read everything, it will read, and it will generate the Swagger document for us. So how the Swagger document will look like? This is what the Swagger document will look like. Now it will be easy for me to copy this and share this URL to the consumers and say, hey, I have these endpoints. If you want to consume my endpoints, take a look at this. So they will go here, take a look at this. They know this is the endpoint. They need to pass an ID, and they will probably get a response like this. See, the response is also been specified how it will look like. And if it is a post, we can tell them this is the content that you need to send it in the request body. So long story short, Swagger is one of the good documentation that supports to expose your endpoints details. So the next one is, what is rate limiting in a web API and why might you implement it? Rate limiting restricts the number of requests from a client over a specific time period. It's implemented to prevent abuse or protect server resources and ensure fair usage. So if I have this endpoint with anonymous access, or maybe with the proper access also, someone can do attack on our website. Like, they can call this from their automation to call millions of times, which means millions of times the request is hit. They can make our site down because a lot of requests are coming and we will not be able to process it, right? So in order to avoid that, if you fix the rate limiting thing in the web API, so we already saw what is rate limiting in one of my video in .NET 7. It's easy. You can add the rate limiting. So the rate limiting is gonna help us prevent all those things. So that's the short answer. So the extra bonus tip for this interview is, I'm gonna share you what are the possible HTTP status code for a given endpoint, and those are the possible things that can happen for the get, put, post, delete patch. Okay, so go over it, and if someone asks you what is the possible written status code for a post endpoint like this, if this is a post endpoint, what is the possible output? It could be a 201 resource created, or it could be 200. That is also sometimes client will send. 400 is a bad request, and 500 is internal server error. And then you should know other things like 401, 403. 401 is unauthorized, 403 is forbidden. One last thing before we close. They might ask you what is authentication and what is authorization. Authentication means to tell who you are. For example, if you go to a shop. Okay, so let's take an example. So there is a store and there is an store manager and employee. Okay, now when someone gets into that store, okay, so when someone gets into the store, the employee will show their ID card, and then the ID card will tell us who you are. So you're allowed to come inside, so you are allowed inside the store. Okay, or maybe inside the store, a particular room. Now the next person comes, he's the manager, he also shows the ID card, he's also allowed to come. Now someone else is coming, they don't have this ID card, they cannot get into the store at all. Okay, so you can check the IT company itself, right? Your access card, you show who you are, then you are allowed to go inside. So authentication and authorization. Let's take a live example. Let's say someone is working in IT company, right? Or any company, but IT company is easy to explain. So an employee walks into the building and he shows the ID card and he swipes it, right? So when he swipes it, it will be known that who you are. You're allowed to come, you're still an employee, the access door opens, you go inside. That's called authentication. Your authentication is done, you're now authorized to go inside. 401 error will not come, you're good. Now you go directly with the same ID card and go to the server room inside the IT company. It will tell you, no, you are not allowed to go inside because you do not have access to get into the server room. There are other people who have access to get into the server room. That's when you get 403 forbidden, that's called forbidden error, and not having access to a particular place. In this web API world, who can access an endpoint, who cannot access an endpoint is called authentication and authorization. Okay, so to prove who you are, or your identity is being taken and you're evaluated, and after that whether you have a particular access to a particular resource or not, that's what will tell you, though you are a valid person, you cannot access a particular page, you cannot access a particular data. Okay, so that's very important. That's the difference between 401 and 403. I hope you enjoyed this video, and this is very important for your preparation. And if it is good, if you like these, let me know in the comment section. subscribe to my channel if you have not done, and I'll see you in the next interview set of questions. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more tech tutorials. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to get notified when we post new videos. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave them in the comments below. Happy coding!